What's up, Tommy Jagai of FanSided here with NFL expert Marcus Mosher. And we had something entirely different planned for today, Marcus. And then the big trade drops. The biggest news that we've had in weeks. The Steelers and Dolphins just pulled off a blockbuster trade that is sending Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith, in a 2027 seventh round pick to the Steelers for Minkah Fitzpatrick and a 2027 fifth round pick. Marcus, so many areas to explore, and we are going to cover all of them today. But where do you want to start with this?
I wish we had more of these trades in the NFL where we get player for player swaps. Like this is like what NBA trades look like. And we just so rarely get them in the NFL. It's just fun. We get a lot of different angles to talk about. It's not just a pick swap or a salary dump. There's some really intriguing angles to this trade. I just wish we'd get more of them. And honestly, Tommy, with some of these GMs getting younger and a lot of these GMs growing up in the fantasy football Madden era, maybe we will. I wouldn't be surprised over the next 10, 15 years if we start to see more trades like this.
That's right. We got the Gladstones of the world now, but
Yeah.
let's start with the Dolphin side of things. But I want to actually share my thoughts really quick.
Go ahead.
I'm not surprised the Steelers traded for Minkah Fitzpatrick. Steelers fan, obviously. We've been following very closely. It was easy to see their interest along the way. I'm not surprised that Jonnu Smith was included in that trade because they had discussions about this. But sending Minkah over there is just a little counterproductive. I'm thrown off by it a little bit. I know for financial reasons, it's probably a big part of the reason why he was included in the trade, sweeten the deal. But that just kind of threw me through a loop. Are you surprised to see Minkah get sent back the other direction?
I mean, yes, I was. I mean, we don't really see teams trade all pro players that often. So, especially when you get a player for player trade. But I do think it makes some sense for Miami. Like, big picture, they clearly didn't want to pay Jalen Ramsey his salary. I think they owed him $22 million additional or on top of what they've already paid him. So that part of it, it's a wash. The Minkah part is interesting because Minka's getting paid. I think it's going to be $15 million this year, $17 million next year. There's no guaranteed money on the 2026 contract. So this could be a one-year rental. But you look at Miami's safety room, and it is Ashton Davis, Patrick McMorris, Elijah Campbell, and Ifedi Melifonwu. Like they had one of the worst safety rooms in the league. And that's because Javon Holland left in free agency for the Giants. So they had a clear need at the position. They brought back a guy that they selected early in the 2018 draft, I believe.
Yeah.
He does fill a big need. And maybe, again, we're just talking this out. Maybe Miami's defense is going to be more open to the idea of moving him around, letting him play in the slot, letting him play in the box than maybe what Terrell Austin and the Steelers were.
Yeah, it's so interesting. We bring this back full circle. Minkah's back to where it all began with the Dolphins. Obviously, completely different coaching staff there, different scheme. But at the end of the day, Marcus, like, did the Dolphins get better by swapping Jalen Ramsey, who, by the way, played 135 snaps from the slot, 80 snaps from the box. He even rushed from the edge 33 times last year. Like, he's a true chess piece in the secondary. And that was with over 720 snaps as a boundary cornerback. Are they getting better by doing this trade?
No, probably not. And I think they know that. But what they are doing is they're getting significantly cheaper. And I think they're getting younger. Ramsey was somebody that they just didn't want to continue to pay. They thought that the play dropped off a little bit last year, and it did. He's still a really, really good player. But I think Miami, Chris Grier is the GM in Miami. I think they probably felt like, hey, we can't have a really old and expensive defense. Let's start shedding the salary. We don't want to be completely awful on that side of the ball. And getting Minkah at least helps bring the floor up a little bit. But yeah, I don't think they're better, but they are cheaper. And I think that was the goal for the Dolphins this offseason.
It's interesting, Marcus, because I think that you could argue that two of the four best players on the entire roster of the Dolphins last year was Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith made the Pro Bowl after 88 catches, 880 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Like 8 was the magic number for him last year. Obviously, a really good season as a receiving threat. Was their top option in the passing game, quite frankly, last year. And so you're taking a hit, I think, on both sides of the football here. So this is strictly financial and looking ahead to the future, right?
Yeah, they didn't want to give Jonnu Smith any more guaranteed money. He was in the final year of his contract, and it was pretty clear that they thought, hey, this is, he had a really good season, 800 yards, 8 touchdowns. But we just don't want to invest that much more money into the position. And I get it. They are a team that wants to throw the ball down the field. And I just don't know how much they need that underneath yak tight end. You look at the tight ends on their roster, it's pretty rough. It's Farrell Brown, Julian Hill, who I think is going to get more snaps, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Miami use more 3 and 4 receiver sets to utilize some of their speed. But more than anything, this is about the Dolphins trying to get younger, trying to get cheaper. They went it all in a couple years ago. Now they're starting to pay the price for that a little bit. And I think this offseason, after not really doing anything in free agency, Teron Armstead retired, not spending up on the Javon Holland, they are just trying to reset the franchise a little bit. And I think that's the way you do it. You get rid of guys that are still good players where you can get assets back for them, but maybe aren't part of your long-term future.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And Marcus, my mind from a Dolphins perspective goes right to head coach Mike McDaniel. Like, this guy is kind of in the hot seat now. He started his career off fantastic. That some of those offenses were brilliant in what he was able to do there, but recently hasn't had the same success. Like, what do you think that he's feeling about this trade right now? Because if this is one that's not helping your roster, is it hurting his chances of keeping his job beyond the 2025 season?
It's possible. I think it depends on how aligned Chris Greer and Mike McDonald are. My belief is that he's probably safe, and that they have a long term vision of how they want to get this team back to being, contender in the AFC. I think my thing is, Tommy, if they had, we saw this team last year with Jalen Ramsey, who had a great season, Jonnu Smith, who was a Pro Bowl tight end, and Tua, who played a majority of the season. He did miss a little bit of time with a concussion. It still wasn't good enough. So what's the point of running back the same roster when it's older and more expensive? There isn't one. There are still a distant second in the AFC East, maybe. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots pass them this year. Start to have some long-term vision about how to get this team back to being where they need to be. And I understand it. Ramsey didn't want to be there. And I think this is one of the things Mike McDaniel has talked about this offseason is, hey, we need to actually establish a culture. And if you remember Jalen Ramsey at the end of the season complaining about not wanting to be there, and Tyreek Hill was complaining about not wanting to be there. Sometimes it takes bold, gutsy moves like this. We'll see if it works out. But I do think it's easy to understand why the Dolphins made a trade like this.
100% agree with the philosophy. Like, if you're the Dolphins right now, you're looking at the scope of things in the AFC in particular. It's like, we weren't very good last year when we had these guys. It's not going to get instantly better right away. And so as long as, like, if I'm Mike McDaniel, like, as long as I'm signed off where it's like, I can be part of this future plan, like, then all for it. But from the front office perspective, it's like, I get what you're doing here. You don't have much of a shot this year with the current outlook of the team, Marcus. And so what I would ask next is, are the Dolphins in, like, let's full on, like, blow it up mode and aim for 2027, 2028? Like, we need to shoot this thing down the line. Our best players were aging out. Tyreek being one of them. Like, is he going to be the next to go? Like, where do they go from here after making a trade that probably put them backwards in terms of talent?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is a playoff team, but I will say, whenever Tua has been healthy, the Dolphins have been very competitive. They have a winning record with Tua. Now, can you count on that? I don't know. The defense, I think, is going to be one of the worst in the league. You look at that cornerback room, and it's bad. But we knew it was going to be bad because we knew that they were going to trade Jalen Ramsey at some point this offseason. They've been telling everybody for several months now that he was available. I just think they're trying to lean more into, let's let our offense be the top unit here. Let's let them lead this team. And we're going to try to be young and cheap on defense. And that's probably the way to go when you're kind of in the middle.
And being in the middle is a bad place to be. We've talked about this before. We've had these conversations, but you can't have your foot in both doorways. And so it looks like the Steelers are trying to pick a direction. Are the Dolphins essentially picking a direction by the move that they just made here?
Yes.
And do you see more trades happening, like, before, during training camp? Like, where do they
Well,
go?
probably not before training camp or during training camp. I do think Tyreek Hill is a potential trade target, but I think that's going to happen maybe more towards the
Yeah.
deadline, right? The trade deadline. Let's see how this year goes. If Miami is 5-2 to start the year, they'll probably hold on to him. But if they're 2-5 or 2-6, and it's just clear that this isn't working, that's when I wouldn't be surprised to see a team go out and trade for Tyreek and just feel like, hey, this is a rental for a half a year and we'll see what goes on. But I'm with you. I admire the philosophy of being like, hey, we have to have a plan. Trying to be
Mhm.
in the middle is no good. Uh, we'll see if it works. I have no problem with what they did. I thought it was interesting that they went out for they got Minka instead of trying to get a, let's say, like a third round pick. I think that's probably around what Jalen Ramsey would have gotten, in a trade. Is a third round pick more valuable than Minka Fitzpatrick? I think we could have a debate about that, but at least it gives you somebody on the back end that helps make your defense just a little bit more respectable at a much cheaper price.
For sure. And again, we're trying to digest this all at once because this just happened recently. But I agree with what you're saying. And I think that that's going to be Miami's strategy as well. It's like maybe we took a step back. Maybe we'll end up being a better football team still at the end of the day. They're probably going to run with what they have right now. And then, like you said, by the trade deadline, if this team is not sitting well and you look ahead to their financial situation, and that's where they might be like, okay, it's time to nail it in. Like, let's blow this thing up. Let's trade Tyreek. Let's unload some assets for future draft capital. We'll kind of reset in terms of the salary cap. And then we'll shoot for further down the line because this isn't working. And so I think that's going to be their ultimate course of action. But Marcus, I would ask you too, like we talk about potential third round pick here, even with getting Minka back in the deal, do you think that Miami should have gotten more than a day 3 pick swap 2 years from now? When you send Jalen Ramsey, who graded out as the 11th best cornerback in the league last year, according to Pro Football Focus, Jonnu Smith graded out as a top 5 tight end from PFF last year. Were they shortchanged in this deal?
So let's break this trade up a little bit because I think trading a fifth round pick for Jonnu
Yeah.
Smith, it felt a little light to me. I think Miami probably should have got maybe a fifth and something else, maybe 2 fifths. I don't know if a fourth would have been enough because you are talking about a guy that wanted a contract raise and Pittsburgh gave it to him. They're paying him $12 million this year. That felt a little light, but it's no big deal. The Ramsey for Minka trade straight up, it's hard because, Jalen Ramsey is going to be a 31-year-old corner this year who was due a lot of money. And I just don't think you're going to get a lot back when the team that's acquiring Ramsey is going to have to pay him $26 million for the upcoming season. Pittsburgh also gave Jalen Ramsey a raise, so that's the number he's getting. Minka, I think, is probably similarly valued right now, and that's why you ended up getting this trade. I think it might be a little bit light for the Dolphins, but I don't think it's egregious or anything like that. I don't think Pittsburgh gave up too much to get Ramsey either.
Yeah, Marcus, and I've been tracking this for obviously a little while now, and the Dolphins' salary cap situation in 2026, they're projected to be over 10 million in the hole.
That's why
7th worst salary cap situation. And so, yeah, you can make sense of what they're trying to do here. Unload Jalen Ramsey's contract. Did they get the compensation that they desired? Probably not, but it's something that they kind of knew they had to do. They kind of boxed themselves into a hole. We knew that Ramsey couldn't be here any longer. We knew that Jonnu Smith was a guy that was on the trade block. And so that's where we are with things. And so I want to shift the focus over to the Pittsburgh Steelers now, Marcus, and take a look at what they got in terms of the overall compensation. So obviously, if you were to just say Ramsey straight up for Minka, like Steelers are still getting the better player here. And I would have said this before the trade. I'm not going back being biased or anything. Minka's been so quiet these past 2 years. 1 interception since the end of the 2022 season. And not that it's all about the takeaways, but when you're a safety, you got to take the football away. And so I know that he's kind of deferred quarterbacks to maybe throwing more to the outside instead of over the middle of the field, but his impact has been pretty minimal. And you ask most Steeler fans around the league, Deshaun Elliott was the better, more impactful safety for this team in 2024. Like, if this was just Minka for Jalen Ramsey straight up, I think the Steelers get the better end of the deal, right?
Probably, just because of the positional value, right? And I will say, I think a big reason why Deshaun Elliott was able to have a really good season was because of Minka and Minka being able to do a lot
Sure.
of
Yeah.
different things. It reminds me a little bit of like Patrick Queen with the Ravens when he was playing next to Roquan. Like he could play free and loose because he didn't have to don't worry about the rest of the defense. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if Elliott takes a little bit of a step back there without Minka. But the more interesting thing to me is, why did Pittsburgh feel the need to go out and get Jalen Ramsey? They drafted Joey Porter Jr. with the 32nd overall pick, 33rd overall pick in
Yeah.
2023. They signed
32nd technically because there was one fewer pick, but it was
Yep.
the first pick of the second round.
Yep.
So, yep.
So there you go. Darius Slay signed a 1-year, $10 million deal that was fully guaranteed this offseason. They have Beanie Bishop, who played in the slot. Clearly, Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan believe that Ramsey can still be a all-pro caliber cornerback, because you're not paying a defensive back $26 million for one season if you don't think he can be. And that number to me, I would have, it's tough because I would think that he would play in the slot because Slay and Joey Porter are outside corners. But I don't know if you're paying a slot defender $26 million a year, especially one who is going to be 31, who only has a little bit of experience doing that. So my gut tells me, Tommy, that Ramsey's going to be one of their starting outside cornerbacks in base, and it's going to be a competition between Porter and Slay, who could be on the outside. They just felt like this was a massive upgrade in their quarterback room that was too good to pass up.
100%. And if it's anything else than that, Marcus, I will be sorely disappointed, because I even wrote this up in my initial newser write-up as soon as the trade happened, that I think that Ramsey is going to be the starter opposite of Porter in base. And when Steelers kick to nickel and dime sub packages, Ramsey will slide into the slot where he has some experience there and has played well from the slot. And then Slay will come on the field. And I think it works out beautifully that way in terms of, let's reserve Darius Slay's body. He's 34-year-old cornerback at this point. We know he can just drop off at any point. And you're getting 3 quality man cover corners on the field when you go to sub package. And maybe, Marcus, maybe the idea is Minka's, we weren't comfortable with where Minka's impact was playing back in the secondary. It's not a deep passing game in the NFL anymore. It's a quick passing game. It's a 3-step drop, get the ball out quickly in 2.5, 3 seconds. That ball's coming out. Maybe the Steelers felt like if we can get more pressure up front, it's going to allow our edge rushers, who we really believe in, to be able to make more big plays and just have a ripple effect on the whole defense. But if the situation, Marcus, was like 1-for-1, like, oh, let's slide Ramsey in and play him at safety. I do believe Ramsey can play anywhere in the secondary with his size, physicality, tackling ability. I think he can play anywhere. But if you're doing that, you're not really getting better. So my projection here has to be he's going to be the starting cornerback outside of Porter, kick inside for sub packages. And I think I'd be surprised if it was anything else.
It's just that you're paying $10 million guaranteed to Slay. Is Slay going to be a backup? Is he going to be happy to be a backup at this stage of his career? These are all things that Mike Tomlin's going to have to figure out.
The thing, Marcus, is they had to cover their bases, right? Like, they didn't know for sure that they would be able to land Jalen Ramsey. And had they known that, I think they obviously would have just passed on the Slay contract altogether. Now, I think what enticed them to Darius Slay to begin with was he was cut by the Eagles because of his salary. So he did not count against the compensatory formula, which the Steelers obviously weighed heavily into their offseason decisions. They have loaded up on draft capital for 2026 with compensatory picks all over the map. 3rd round, 4th, 5th, 6th. They've got a little bit of everything going for them now. I think that weighed into that. But I do think that if this Ramsey trade was on the table much earlier in the offseason, if they would have been able to pull it off, then they don't get Slay. What's interesting, though, is I do think that they've spoken highly of Corey Trice. I think that he's been good when he's played. This kind of buries a player like that. And at best, you're talking about Trice as a dime defender in year 3. And so I don't see him making much of an impact now. I think it's going to be primarily those 3 guys. Beanie Bishop's going to be going back to the bench, if I had to guess. it gives them tremendous depth at the cornerback position all of a sudden, because Ramsey can play inside, outside. Porter gets injured, you got Ramsey. If Beanie Bishop goes down for the season with an ACL, whatever, you got a guy that can play slot there full time. You don't have to worry about it. So I do think it helps them tremendously from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. When you add a player like Ramsey, it just pushes everybody down. And now Corey Trice, who is somebody who has dealt with a lot of injuries, he's fighting just to make a spot, make the roster. Because when you're the cornerback 4, you got to be a big time special teams contributor. And we know Ramsey and Slay aren't going to do that. Neither is Joey Porter. So that's just where you're ending up. That's a good thing for the Steelers. Now they have lots of guys who are competing for snaps. One of the things that is just interesting to me is that the defensive back position has been one where generally you want to get younger. You want to have some young athletes. The 5 starting defensive backs, let's say it's Slay, Ramsey, Porter, and then in the safeties, it's Deshaun Elliott and Juan Thornhill, who the Steelers signed this offseason from the Browns. Their average age right now is 29 and a half. That'll be 30 by the time we get to week 1. This is the oldest secondary in the NFL by quite a bit. Again, I think it's very talented. So don't take anything away from that. It's a very talented unit. But the concern is always with these old guys is are they going to be able to hold up over the course of a 17-game schedule? And by the time you get to January, when the Steelers need to start winning playoff games, what are these guys going to look like? I think Mike Tomlin is hoping that the depth is maybe able to handle it a little bit, and they can sub these guys in and out. But that's where we're at.
Yeah, 100%. It's old. And if you look beyond the 2025 season, it's like, this is not a particularly bright future. Like, obviously, Joey Porter needs to take a step up. I thought he took a step back from his rookie season last year. He's the guy that you're banking on. He's the one youthful piece in the secondary that has a glimmer of a hope of having a great future. The rest of these guys have had their moments in the sun already. They've had their best seasons are already behind them. And so this is truly a 1-year play, maybe 2. If you can squeeze 2 out of it, that's fine. But Rodgers is only going to be here for 1. And so we talk about picking a direction. The Steelers clearly picked a direction when they made this trade. And I'm okay with that. I really am. Like, they didn't have to give up much draft capital in order to pick that direction. And I think get better overall what they just did with this move. But at least they're choosing. They're not staying in the middle and saying, I want to have my cake and eat it too. I want to be a young team. I want to hold on to all my draft capital, but I'm also not willing to make splash moves to help my team win right now. They're trying to make those moves. And if you look back from the beginning of the offseason, they traded for DK Metcalf. They eventually signed Aaron Rodgers like we thought that they would. And now you're trading for Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey. I think that they've bolstered the roster overall. That's in addition to their draft class. Their outgoing pieces, they did lose some starters, but ultimately fairly insignificant, and they lost Dan Moore, Dante Jackson, guys who are kind of stopgap players. Landon Roberts, who was admittedly a really good downhill linebacker last year. But now you look at their defense, Marcus, with this trade, Thornhill becomes, I think, the biggest hole in the secondary now. You can get away with that as a safety if the rest of your roster is well-rounded. And I think that it is. Peyton Wilson should take a step up as an off-ball linebacker this year. Their defensive front just got graded out the best in the league by PFF. You can understand where they're coming from when you have Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton, and you spend a first-round pick on Derek Harmon, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig. Like, they don't really have many holes. It's like Patrick Queen, the inconsistency of Patrick Queen, and then having Juan Thornhill in the second. There's the 2 biggest weaknesses with the Ramsey trade. Do you think the defense is better, and where could they rank? Like, you just put a number on them this year.
Yeah, I think the defense as a whole is better. Whenever you trade in a Pro Bowl corner, a Pro Bowl safety for a Pro Bowl corner, I think that's an upgrade. And I do think they're going to be really good on defense. I think the thing for Pittsburgh, and this is honestly going to be the deciding factor this season, is this is the most expensive defense in the NFL by far. And if they finish 6, well, that's a very good ranking. It's probably going to be a disappointment because they need this unit to be one of the best in the NFL, if not the best, because they're investing so much into it. I expect them to be really good because they have a lot of talent. You mentioned it, like Juan Thornhill might be their worst starter, and he's a pretty good player when he's on the field. They've got depth at the right spots. They've got a good combination of stars and young players. This defense should be a dominating unit. The only question I have, Tommy, and this is what I've been saying for a while now, is that it's a little bit older. Like, you're looking at
Yeah.
probably the league's oldest defense. You are relying on a lot of guys who are going to be in their 30s, with TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay. I mean, it goes on and on. How does that help, or how does that look over the course of the season? I wouldn't be surprised if it looks really good to start the year and it fades off a
Mhm.
little bit, because that's just kind of been the trend here in Pittsburgh, is that some of these guys start to wear down as the season goes on. But on a depth chart, looking at the roster, yeah, there's very few units that you can say are definitively better than Pittsburgh on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and that's the fear, is that late in the season, the Steelers won't, the defense won't have the same luster as it did early on, because older guys are getting worn out a little bit. We've seen that over the past several years. But it's like, if you're the Steelers and your plan was to go with Aaron Rodgers all along, excuse me, you've got a 41-year-old quarterback who turns 42 in December. You've got a 36-year-old Cam Hayward. TJ Watt turns 31 in October. Jalen Ramsey's 30 years old. Like, what's the difference at this point? Because you can see the end of the tunnel in sight for the Steelers, and it's like, once that closes, you're not getting it back for a while. You've had a couple quality pieces you've drafted over the past several years. It's going to take quite some time to build this thing back up. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another move, maybe one more move after this. Though I do think that they tried to kind of kill two birds with one stone, getting the offensive piece and the defensive piece. But they are picking that direction. We'll see how it goes. Let's talk about the lesser talked about player in this trade, which is Jonnu Smith, who was a good football player last year. You've been a big Jonnu Smith fan throughout his career, kind of that start off as that H-back, do it all for you guy. Obviously had by far his best receiving season last year. He joins a tight end room that already has Pat Freiermuth, who the Steelers have been high on. Darnell Washington. He's that good Y inline kind of number 2 tight end there. How do you see like this shaking up, and what do you think Jonnu Smith's role is going to be on the Steelers?
I mean, he's your starting tight end. I mean, I know Pittsburgh fans maybe don't want to hear that, but you trade for Jonnu Smith and you give him a 1-year, $12 million contract that is fully guaranteed. He is your starting tight end. Now, I think Pat Freiermuth and Jonnu Smith at this stage of their careers basically play the same position. You're talking about the big slot tight end, where yes, they can both line up in line, but they do their best work out of the slot. Jonnu's just a better receiver than what Pat Freiermuth is. He's way more dynamic after the catch. And frankly, I think he's the better red zone option. I think he's your starting tight end. Freiermuth fills in. I think he's the number 2 guy. He plays more in line than ever before. And then Darnell Washington goes back to being the tight end 3 on this offense. And Pittsburgh is probably going to lead the league in 13 personnel, 3 tight ends on the field, have Metcalf as the one lone receiver. But I don't think you make a trade for Jonnu Smith and give him, a big time raise for him to be a part-time player. Like, he's going to play a majority of the snaps in this offense.
Yeah, and I think that he should. I do. And I agree with you. He's the better player than Freiermuth, which makes it interesting, though. When I've talked about this on the Still Curtain podcast, and I've written about this, there's so much overlap between those two players and the roles that they play. Both of them are by far their best playing from the slot as that oversized receiver, essentially. And so it makes me wonder, like, are you just going to try to get both on the field all at the same time? Freiermuth's not a particularly good blocker. I mean, we know that Arthur Smith loves his tight ends. So he's got a deep group of them now for sure. It does make it interesting, though, to see that you kind of got essentially the same type of player back in return, but a better version, but an older version of that player who, again, needs that contract unless you're just doing the 1-year thing. The Steelers, interestingly, gave Pat Freiermuth a 4-year, $40+ million contract last offseason. So it's like, you know what I would have preferred? If you were able to keep Minka somehow and say, well, we're going to have the enormous cap hit on our defense and in the secondary, but let me give Freiermuth back in return, because there's just so much overlap here. I don't think that you need these two guys together.
Well, I wonder if Miami just doesn't want to pay more money to the tight end position, because they're already paying so much on offense for Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle. Maybe they feel like that's a position they need to start saving some money. But yeah, we should mention Pittsburgh gave Jonnu Smith a raise as well. He was due $8 million. He signed a 1-year, $12 million deal as soon as the trade got announced. So he's getting that deal. He's getting that contract. Again, this is your starting tight end, and I know there's a lot of love for Pat Freiermuth in Pittsburgh, and I get it, but he's going to be the guy that's going to suffer the most from this. I think the thing that we're all wondering now is, okay, do they go out and get a number 2 receiver? Or is Jonnu Smith going to function as the number 2 receiver in this offense and he plays more in the slot and it's Freiermuth in line? But this is clearly going to be an Arthur Smith style of offense where you're having multiple tight ends on the field, a majority of the snaps. You're going to be under center. How does Aaron Rodgers fit into that offense? I don't know. This is one of the more strange off seasons, and I understand why Pittsburgh did everything. We've been talking about for a while how we want Pittsburgh to pick one direction. But the thing that I wonder, Tommy, and I would love for you to chime in, is can you have immediate success when you're changing over so much of the roster in one off season, and a lot of it late, right? Like Aaron Rodgers didn't sign until, was it June? You make this Jonnu Smith trade late June. You bring in Jalen Ramsey. Could you expect all of these pieces to fit in right away? Or is it going to take a year or two? And does Pittsburgh have a year or two with this current roster to really go for it?
That is the $1 million question right there. And it's so warranted because the Steelers have had a ton of roster turnover. But between the starters that walked away this year, you've got a new quarterback, you've got a new number 1 wide receiver, you've got a new top tight end. Like there's a lot of it. And typically what I would say to that is typically by the second season, you would say you'd have the most drastic improvement, if you will. This year, though, I think it's completely fair to question if that's going to be an issue. Are they going to have chemistry? And knowing that the window is only 1 year, and Rodgers, he basically came out and said this is it for him. Yep. He's going to disappear into the sunset after the season. You won't hear from him. Knowing that, it's like, can you afford to change things up that much? At the same time, I think you almost have to because you can't. Yeah, you can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. The Steelers have had 2 straight seasons of those 9 wins. Like you can't do that anymore. You've got to try to make it better. And I think they're at least making the effort to do that. Whether it will be or not, I think is anybody's guess. I think that they should have gotten better on paper, both offensively and defensively, but we can say that before and still not yield those results. Let's talk about like the overall trade here, winner, loser. Like I think that you can argue that it benefited both sides in terms of the Dolphins' philosophy and the Steelers' obviously win now approach. But if you were to list an overall winner of this trade, who would you label?
Ooh, the winner of this trade, probably the Steelers, because I do think Ramsey is a better player than Minka, and you just added another weapon on offense in Jonnu Smith. Now we can debate his fit and how what that means for Freiermuth and Darnell Washington, but you did add more talent. All it cost you was a safety and a 5th-round pick. Yes, you're paying more money, right? You're paying $12 million to Jonnu, roughly $10 million more for Ramsey. But I don't know if that really matters when you're going all in this season. Like Pittsburgh wants to. I think the biggest thing, Tommy, that we're getting from this is that you're really starting to see for the first time in a long time, Mike Tomlin, Omar Khan, and the Rooneys feel the pressure of not winning a playoff game over the last 8 years. Because they would never do these trades, before. Making one trade for a DK Metcalf, that was a massive move that we haven't seen Pittsburgh make in a long time. But to trade for Metcalf, to trade for Jalen Ramsey, to sign an Aaron Rodgers, to sign a Darius Slay is just so out of character for them. They are clearly feeling the pressure of needing to win that playoff game. I do think the roster is much better now than it was at this time last year. Is it enough? Again, we'll see. Well, a lot of it's going to depend on health because, again, this is a very old roster. But I do think in this trade specifically, Pittsburgh did win.
Yeah, and I agree. As objectively as possible, as a Steelers fan, I agree that they won this trade. Now, if you take Jonnu Smith completely out of it, I still think that it's really close. Like Ramsey's the better player than Minka. He's been more impactful at this stage of his career. But you're also considering the late round pick swap. You're considering Ramsey's contract. So I think that there would have it would have been more of a discussion there. You add in a tight end who is coming off a really strong season. I think that the Steelers definitely got the better of Miami in this trade, though I do see where both sides are coming from. Now it's a matter of, can they make it work? Can the Dolphins still find a way to be successful after getting rid of 2 of your top 5 players on your roster, cutting down the salary, giving yourself a better future outlook? Can they still find a way to make it work with what they have there before the deadline? And maybe they will be one of those 3 or 4 teams in the NFL that inevitably ends up unloading before the deadline, knowing that this isn't our year. We've got to kick the can down the road. And then for the Steelers, it's like, all of your eggs are in this basket. You have to win now. You've got to make a deep playoff push now, or everything that you're doing will all be for naught. Now, they still have, I think what's encouraging, if you're a Steelers fan listening, is they still have really positive outlook in terms of draft capital for 2026. And so they could still rebolster their whole roster next year with all the picks they have in place, assuming they don't go out and trade those away. And I think that that's probably the best thing that GM Omar Khan has done so far, is being able to get the maybe aging out depth pieces, but at a small cost in terms of draft capital. You're able to keep hold of the draft capital that you have. And so even though you are making that more win now approach, you're still keeping your assets for the future. And I think that that is where you can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I think for Miami, we've seen teams do kind of rebuilds like this where they keep their quarterback and they keep a couple star players, but they really try to kind of get rid of everybody that they don't think is necessarily a building block. And I think of the Chargers a couple years ago when they moved on from Mike Williams and Keenan Allen in the same offseason. They moved on from a lot of just older players, like guys that are still big name players, and a couple of them are still playing in the NFL and playing at a high level, but they just needed to start shedding some salary. I think that's where Miami is at right now. And we can say that the Steelers won the trade, and I think they did, but I don't think Miami necessarily lost. These were moves that they had to make. And I think if you and I were doing this podcast and, Jalen Ramsey was on the team and they gave Jonnu Smith a contract extension, we would be saying, okay, what's Miami doing? They're clearly not, the best team in their division. They're hanging around in the middle. What's the plan here? I at least admire Chris Greer trying to get this team back in the right spot financially. Now they're going to obviously have to nail on some draft picks. They're going to have to develop some young guys, but this was something that needed to be done, and they got it done.
Yeah, and interestingly, Marcus, I think you could have almost made the same case for the Steelers at the beginning of the offseason and say, hey, we've got a 36-year-old or soon to be 36-year-old Hayward at that time, in a aging TJ Watt, who's coming off a little bit of an underwhelming season. The rest of the assets on the team were fairly young. And so they could have also have chosen to go that direction. I didn't expect anything less. This is Mike Tomlin is still here. He's not about that. They're not going to let that happen as long as he's the head coach. They're going to try to stay competitive every year. It's why they have the longest non-losing streak in the NFL. They want to try to bring playoff success to this team. 8-year drought without a playoff win. They're looking to avoid that decade mark. And then, I mean, once that happens, Marcus, there's no return. Like, this is going to be an ugly stamp on Tomlin's career if he can't get out of this slump before the time he calls it quits.
All right, here we'll finish the show on this.
Okay.
This feels like, to me, Tomlin's swan song a little bit. Like, if the Steelers don't win a playoff game this year, or they don't make the playoffs entirely, I won't be surprised if the Steelers and Tomlin decide to go their separate ways, because they've given him a really expensive roster, right? They've given him the quarterback that he wants in Aaron Rodgers. They went out and traded for Jalen Ramsey, who was, known to be a little bit of a diva. They went out and traded for DK Metcalf, who Seattle kind of wanted to move on from because they were ready to go. So this is his roster. This is a roster filled with high-priced older players, and that's what Tomlin likes. Like, Tomlin likes having a veteran roster. If it doesn't happen this year, I would not be surprised if the Steelers and Tomlin go in their separate directions, because it hasn't worked. It didn't work. And now it's time to get younger for this rebuild that's clearly coming either in 2026 or in 2027.
And I think that they would be totally justified in doing that. The Steelers have 3 playoff wins over the last 13 years. They came against quarterbacks Matt Moore, Alex Smith, and AJ McCarron. Not exactly the cream of the crop.
No.
So even when they had the postseason success, it was against lesser competition. They have got to show that they're a legitimate contender. And if they can't do that this year, I do think that it's probably time to move on. But we'll leave it at that note. If you guys have any other thoughts or questions, drop them in the chat for us. We go live on this show every single Monday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. And thanks again for watching the No Huddle show on Stacking the Box.